time to talk politics with Roni and
Okay,
Sheila.
I'm Sheila.
And I'm Roni, bringing you TakeBack.org, a political talk show designed to keep you informed, let you know what's going on in politics. And tonight we have with us John Wersbicki, who
Good.
is a local guy, a lawyer, writes the ctblueblog.org.
.com.
.com. Okay.
Okay, that gives everybody his opinion. We're allowed to have his opinion.
Yep, you can.
And we're delighted to have you tonight.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you, John. And John is with Brown Jacobson in Norwich. And in your legal career, you do consumer work and...
I do consumer work. I do Social Security disability work. I do a lot of housing work. I do civil litigation and a little bit of this and that and the other thing as well.
Right, but
But
your
you're here
real
tonight as a
love is
political
politics.
analyst.
Right. Right. We had you on in the last election cycle, and we talked about blogs, because a lot of people were just becoming familiar with the notion that anybody out there can set up a website and can just extemporaneously talk through their website about what's happening. And you've done that. You talk about what you did on your weekend, you talk about family issues, but it all has the political thread running through it, right?
Well, 99% of it, yeah.
And you write almost...
Except for on Friday nights where I always have a little music video.
Right, right. What have you noticed about the blogging community in the last 2 years since the 2006 election cycle? Any changes, anything special?
Well, I think some of it has become, some blogs have become more professional and they've become more like newspapers. It depends on, of course, there's a whole continuum of blogs, but for instance, Josh Marshall, who's a national blog, his site now has lots of writers, as opposed to when he started, he was the only writer on the blog.
That's the Talking Points memo.
Right, Talking Points memo, and it's really like it's part of it's called Talking Points Muckraker or something along those lines.
It's got an election part,
right.
yeah.
And they do a lot of original reporting and that sort of thing. So they've really branched out. So I think some of it's become more professional, but you know, for every one of those, there's probably 15 or 20 like mine, where it's just one person just giving their opinion, and it's very diverse.
Yeah, I've noticed that talk show people, news commentators like Wolf Blitzer and his ilk, are all doing blogs, and they will announce it while they're doing the news.
Oh, really?
Yeah, come listen to my blog.
I almost never watch the news. I get all my news from either the newspapers or from the net. So.
Yeah, you made an interesting point about them becoming more professional or more newspaper-oriented. And I guess the question is, you know, we started out with that awful Drudge character who still has his website, and his journalistic standards were under attack because he's not doing the kind of fact-checking and authenticating that a newspaper reporter is supposed to do. Are these other blogs like the Talk Points
memo?
Well,
I think Talking Points does. I mean, in fact, they were the first, years ago, Josh Marshall was the first one to really start digging into this story about the backstory to Bush's speech, the State of the Union address, where he was talking about the
uranium.
I'm trying to remember
The tubes.
Not the tubes. The supposed purchases of uranium from
Niger,
Africa.
yeah.
And he's the one who uncovered the fact that that was all it was an Italian source story that was bogus, and so he really did a lot of original reporting on that, and it was well sourced. I'm sure there are people out there who play fast and loose. I mean, people like me, I just rely on what I'm able to read in other places. I don't do any original reporting other than once or twice with very, very, very minor things. But you just have to hope that what you do rely on has some credibility. You don't want to rely on something that you know is suspect. But from my point of view, that's how I do it. But Drudge is another story. And I've actually never gone to Drudge's website, just sort of on principle. It's like going to Walmart. It's like, I just won't do it.
Don't you want to know what the opposition is thinking?
Well, you hear about it because you hear about it through secondary,
Yeah.
tertiary sources. The people say Drudge reported this or Drudge reported that. But it's interesting that a lot of the press appears to feel that if it's on Drudge, it's something that they can report, not necessarily as being the case, but that they can pass on as, well, he's reporting it, so then therefore we can say it, even without having to independently confirm that it is in fact true.
Right. So they can make a report that this blog is reporting this rumor, and now
Right.
we're not saying
We're
the
not
rumor is
saying-
true. We're
Absolutely.
just reporting that a rumor is going around.
Right.
That is
Yeah.
a change in journalism, isn't it?
I would say so, yeah. But that's nothing that the blogs are
it's-
doing. That's something that the mainstream.
The Main Street is
Yeah.
doing stuff like that. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I
that's-
mean, when you think about it, all of Fox News, I mean, they'll take something that's just spun out of thin air and go with it for days. So
and
we heard
don't
about
check it.
from John Kerry and all that stuff in 2004. That was stuff that was reported on the news about the Swift boating, and they treated it seriously, even though they knew it wasn't true.
Interviewed the guys who supposedly wrote the book,
Right.
the whole 9 yards. Shall we make your head spin now?
Sure. Oh, you're not okay. Go ahead.
Okay, you're going to explain to us what credit default swaps are.
All right. Well, all right. This is something I wrote about. I found it online. It was a story in the New York Times, and I said in my post that I didn't quite understand all the economics of it, but I'll try to explain as best I can. There is a totally unregulated market for something called credit default swaps. I've even forgotten the name of the term. A person who buys a corporate bond can buy an insurance policy to protect them in case the bond defaults. The person who buys that insurance policy can actually sell their rights under that policy to somebody who doesn't even own the bonds. And Sheila, you remember in basic law school, supposedly you're not supposed to be able to have a policy if you don't have an insurable interest.
Exactly. You have to have the interest. Yeah.
So, and not only can the buyer sell their rights under the policy, but the seller can sell its obligations under the policy. It's, I guess, sort of like Lloyd's of London, where you don't really know at any given time who the insurer actually is. So if there's a default, the person who is holding the policy has to then have possession of the bonds. They can't make a claim under the policy unless they actually own the bonds. So they have to go out and buy the number of bonds that they have insured, and then they have to find the insurer and collect the full value of the bonds. So essentially, they're able to recover. They're able to buy these bonds because now they're in default for a lot less than what they're going to get from the insurance company to cover their alleged losses. All of which works fine when there's very, very low rates of corporate default. But when you start getting into a situation where lots and lots and lots of bonds default, apparently the market is going to go a little bit crazy, particularly because there's apparently $45 trillion worth of policies, or at least face value of these policies out there, which far exceeds the value of all the bonds and all the stocks in the country. So how that could happen, I have no idea. All I know is that apparently this is one of the next markets that may very well come back to haunt all the rest of us, because if it goes belly up, again, it'll cause repercussions throughout the economy. And it's completely unregulated. There's absolutely no government oversight of any of this. So,
And
None
then
at all?
none.
and then we go ahead and we'll bail out those corporations and companies, but we don't bail out the little guy that really suffers the most. Well, getting back to politics, although that is involved in politics, if the recession keeps going on, this thing may come to fruition. If you are a Democrat in today's world, where do you want to get your news? What do you want to read to know what's really going on politically?
Well, I think it's a mix. You'd read the newspapers, obviously. When I read the New York Times, the day isn't too bad. And then you want to. I think what you want to do is you want to read sources online that you feel have credibility. And the only way to do that, I think, is to read them often enough to make a decision on your own as to whether or not you think what this person has to say and the kinds of things that they link to have credibility. I mean, I use a news feeder, which is essentially something that goes onto the web for you, and you tell it what sites to visit. It downloads the articles so that I can read, in the course of, let's say, 5 or 10 minutes, I can read little synopses of literally dozens and dozens of articles, and then if I want to read more, I click and I get the full article, and then I can go to whatever that might link to. But
So how do you do that? How do you set that up on your
well,
computer?
there's a lot of free news readers you can download. They usually call them news readers, and then you just, the better ones will allow you to simply, it's called an RSS feed, and if you're at your browser, the better ones will actually subscribe to the feed for the page you're visiting. So for instance, if you're at the New York Times op-ed page, if you open up your news feeder and say subscribe to the page that I'm at right at the moment, it'll set up a subscription. So then you'll have a little, in your news reader, you'll have a little row that will be for the New York Times op-ed page, and then every day it will just download all the op-ed pieces. So that's how I basically read, people like Paul Krugman and that sort of thing. I'm usually on my news reader rather than in the paper. And but then, that's the news sources, and then there's people that you can learn to sort of feel like have some credibility as far as their, their take on the news and how they, in the kind of people will find stories, write little, blog pieces about them, op-ed pieces. That's basically what I do is write 2 or 3 little tiny op-ed pieces every day.
Sure. And so so you told us about the reader service. That's interesting. Which are the blogs that you would recommend that we look at?
I think Daily Kos is like the classic, and Atrius. Those are the 2 big ones. Josh Marshall's website is great but that's really more of a news site in terms. It's and that's good. I mean, it's better than just going to people who are just telling you what they think. There's a guy named Steve Clemens. I think he writes for the Washington
Monthly. Is it the Monthly? I know him, yeah.
And he's good. Let's see. What else do I have? I've got Hullabaloo is one that I think is good. She's just an extremely good commentator on what's going on in the world. I mean, just very insightful analyst. Interesting sort of story there because on her website, her little logo is a picture of a man sort of screening into the...
From that movie Network.
Is that where it's from?
Yes,
yeah.
The guy who won the Academy
I think for years
Award.
everybody
Yes.
thought that whoever was writing it was a man.
What did he say? I can't take it anymore.
yeah,
I've had it, or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's she's very good. I mean, I think it's well worth reading. Trying to just go down.
You know who I like? Talk Left. Have you seen Talk Left? It's Geraldine Merritt. She's an attorney, criminal attorney. She used to appear on all the shows during the OJ stuff. Would go on all the shows and give her opinions, but she also has a political slant to it, and she's good.
Yeah.
Talk Left.
I think I've read her stuff. My wife goes into her place all the time.
Okay.
So she'll say, I saw this on Talk Left.
Crooks and Liars is good.
Yeah. There's a guy named, I'm trying to remember his last name, Glenn. He's on
Greenwald.
Yes, Glenn Greenwald. He's
right.
another lawyer, blogger. He's extremely good,
He's
especially on legal issues, particularly to do with things like FISA we were talking about before the show. He's very knowledgeable about that sort of stuff. And that's good too, because I think part of what the mainstream doesn't do well is really explain the backstory to a lot of the things that they're reporting. I mean, they'll just, they basically will tell you, well, he said and she said, and they never bother to tell you, well, here's the real scoop, and here's the deal.
That's what newspapers used to do.
Right, but they don't do that anymore. And so somebody like him will say, it doesn't mean, here's what they're saying, but look, here's what the statute says, here's what the case law says, here's what the reality of this all is, which you don't get, and it's unfortunate that we don't get that from the newspapers. It's odd. Sometimes you'll see something, for instance, I mean, I'm a big Paul Krugman fan, and he'll write about something in his column, and you'll think, but they're not reporting that in the paper. Why is it that, we're not getting this in the front page of the Times? It shouldn't only be in his column. And, there is such a thing as truth, And it seems like for a lot of the media, it's more like, well, we report what this person says, and we report what that person says. This man says the world is round, this man says the world is flat. These are equally legitimate things for people to say. It's like, for instance, the debate about evolution. He says that the biblical story is true. He says the Darwinian story is true. Well, who are we to say? I mean, the fact that the science is all on one side, we don't need to report that. That's not our mission. Our mission is to tell you what these people are saying, and to treat everything as if it's equally legitimate, which of course it's not. So,
Well, I
end of
think
speech.
they have to appear impartial.
Well, but that's really not. It's not impartial to give legitimacy to something that is inherent.